everybody. Welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and today we'll be talking about how there's no more basic element of human nature than our desire to stand out, unless it's our competing desire to fit in. Here to talk about these conflicting desires and how leaders can use them to mobilize and inspire their teams is today's guest, Dr. Stephanie Johnson. Stephanie is a business professor with the University of Colorado, and she has written a book on this topic called Inclusify: The Power of Uniqueness and Belonging to Build Innovative Teams. Inclusify will be available for purchase in June of 2020. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is your first time to talk about the book, right?
Yeah, you're quite right.
We are so lucky. Well, let's talk about these conflicting desires of wanting to stand out, but also fit in at the same time. Why do you think we're like this?
I think it's just human nature because we all want to be part of a group, that belonging feeling that so many companies are focusing on in terms of their inclusion efforts. Like we want to belong, but it's part of the American spirit and maybe part of the human spirit to also want to be your unique self. Like you want to do you, right, at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all want to know that we are original and that people see us as original, but also want to be accepted and fit in at the same time. It is so conflicting, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that really the key here is making people feel like they belong, but as their true self. So you don't belong because you're willing to change who you are in order to fit in. That's actually not really feeling like you belong. So you don't actually feel included. At the same time, if everyone's just unique and we're all these different silos, then we miss out on the belonging. So you really need them both.
Sure. How do you think these desires impact the workplace and our dynamics on the job?
So this is what my research for Inclusify really focused on, was looking at leaders who are really trying to do a good job when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but they're just slightly missing the mark. And when I interviewed their employees, so I interviewed leaders, executives, CEOs, and then in some cases, I interviewed their teams as well, their subordinates. And the leaders who thought they were doing a good job, but their subordinates didn't actually necessarily think they were doing a good job, we're usually missing out on one of these two essential elements, either uniqueness or belonging. So you might be a leader that really focused on trying to make everyone feel like they belong, but in doing so, everyone felt the pressure to kind of fit in and not be their unique self.
And to mold, I would assume.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
the part of the problem with that is you're going to get less innovation of ideas, and your decision making actually becomes worse because people are trying to fit in. So you don't give dissenting opinions, right? Because that doesn't fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're all alike and part of this team, then you want to agree rather than disagree. On the flip side, if everyone is just like lone wolves, then you're missing out on that like human need to really be part of a team.
Okay, up until now, how have companies and leaders been dealing with these issues, in your opinion?
I think they're really trying. This is probably one of the most interesting things that came out of my research, was that people really have good intentions and they're trying to create inclusive and diverse teams. Like companies are trying to do it, and lots of leaders they're really giving their best effort to do it. But I noticed that because they missed out on one of these two essential elements, there's a lot of organizations that have kind of I call them culture crusader archetype. They're like, everyone has to fit the mold. You think like a lot of big tech companies that have that culture crusader-y feeling, like I hire on culture fit and we want everyone to kind of fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other organizations or teams that they completely miss out on both of them, and they don't value people's unique perspectives, but they also don't team build. And then there's other cases where maybe this is the most surprising thing that I found, some leaders who were really trying to celebrate uniqueness. So imagine, I call him a white knight. So imagine this like heroic leader who's really trying to support diversity and inclusion and promote the importance of having different perspectives, a champion for women, that kind of thing. But in doing so, they hurt the belonging because they end up alienating other men. So they've essentially achieved the uniqueness, but they've kind of messed up on the belonging part.
That is so interesting. I am so curious as to what what inspired your interest in this topic and what eventually motivated you to write this. I would assume it's from years in different cultures and corporations, but please tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. So I have probably always done this type of research. Maybe 20 years ago, I started doing leadership research, and I really wanted to study this like hardcore leadership topic. And I did, but I constantly found gender differences, certain behaviors that positively predicted success for men and negatively predicted for women, or just didn't predict for women. And so I decided I was going to look into this whole gender piece of leadership until, I solved it. And then I could go back to studying
Mhm.
leadership. But, I haven't solved it. After, so many years of doing empirical studies and studying different corporations, I think it wasn't until probably, I'll say around 2016, where leaders really started to emerge as super successful. And when I saw these exemplars of leaders who were just like really doing this well, I had this like, what if I just ask them, right? Like rather than trying to solve it
Yeah.
myself, go ask these CEOs, like the CEO of Salesforce and Gap and Starbucks, companies that really focus on diversity and inclusion. And so that's what I did. And that was kind of the start of the book Inclusify, because when I really got to understand what they were doing, then I was like, well, gosh, now I kind of want to share this insight with everyone, because it's not,
Yeah.
it's not rocket science, but it does require this perspective that I think if people understood the uniqueness and belonging, that they could actually do a much more effective job.
So you essentially made a list of big brands that you respected that were doing well in the market and you contacted their CEOs.
Yeah, you got it. Or organizations that had very diverse corporate boards, which is something
Mhm.
that I think is reflective of a broader leadership commitment to diversity when you have a diverse corporate board. And, not 100% of the CEOs took my call, but the ones who did, they were just so passionate about diversity and inclusion that they made time for me to do these interviews.
That's awesome. So what does it mean to inclusify?
So, inclusifying is the leadership style that I talk about in the book. And it's basically living and leading in a way that recognizes the uniqueness and belonging of your employees. And so I often think of leaders who say, well, I don't care what color you are. I don't care if you're black, white, red, or blue, or it doesn't make a difference to me if you're a man or a woman. I just want people who are going to perform well. Well, here's the thing. It does matter to people what race or gender or sexual orientation they are.
Mhm.
And so when a leader says, I don't care about those aspects of you, then I think what people hear is, look, you don't really care about me. These are things that are central to who I am and my identity, and they're actually adding value to our organization. So if you don't care about them, maybe I'll go somewhere where people do care about them.
Yeah.
And so it's recognizing those things, that everyone is unique and you value their different perspectives. And now you have all these valued individuals, showing them how they all fit together as essential ingredients for the overall team. And that's the belonging piece.
Well, how would you say that this process benefits leadership?
So, what the data show is it increases innovation to have different perspectives and people who feel like they can share their different perspectives. It increases employee engagement to feel like you're valued for your unique background and personality. It increases retention. People are less likely to quit their job if they feel like their uniqueness is valued and that they belong. And overall, it causes people to view the leader more positively.
Man, I have talked to so many people in the workplace, and I will tell you the common denominator of, I think, what holds employees in their organization is to feel valued and to feel seen and appreciated for who they are.
You are so right. I mean, I think that was one of the things that came out of this research was many employees who they didn't feel like they were part of the team, and they didn't feel like people valued them for who they were. They talked about it really in terms of feeling invisible. Like,
Hmm.
and you think of like, sometimes I think of like shift workers who might work late at night and they're, no one sees them. Or sometimes we might treat staff like this, or the cleaning staff, like people don't necessarily make eye contact with them and chat with them. They're just kind of working around us.
Hmm.
And I've heard that before, but what was surprising to me is that people who are part of teams can also feel invisible if no one's talking to them, like on the interpersonal level, on that belonging thing, and no one's asking for their insight. They just feel like they don't exist. And I don't really think there's anything worse than that feeling.
I can tell that you are empathetic, aren't you?
Yeah, like crazy empathetic.
Well, I love that this is such a value for you too. It's a value for you. It's a core value for you. I can tell that you want every human being to feel seen and cared for, and that you would write a book so that you could show other people at the top on how they can practically do this with their teams, because that's going to keep their employees there.
Yeah, exactly. And anyone can do it. So probably the CEO is going to change the composition of the corporate board, but any manager or even employee can be aware of these things and like take a moment to make sure that everyone feels seen and everyone feels like they belong. And, if you don't know about someone, like just asking to learn more about them and making that human connection is just so valuable to people.
I agree. Okay, we're going to take a sponsorship break right now, but when we get back, we'll talk with Stephanie about what's involved in the Inclusify process. So stay with us. Thanks for listening. Also, thanks to A Better Leader for supporting this week's episode of Project HR. A Better Leader is leadership training that brings your leaders into alignment. A Better Leader's online platform improves engagement and morale and directly affects your bottom line. Get your free 2-week trial at abetterleader.com. We're back with Dr. Stephanie Johnson, author of Inclusify. Stephanie, can you share with us any specifics about the Inclusify process?
Absolutely. So the idea for the book was to break this down as simply as possible. So there's 2 essential human needs, uniqueness and belonging. And then for each of those, there's 4 different leader behaviors that they can engage in to try to increase uniqueness or belonging. And then within each of those 4 behaviors, I offer 2, so it's 8 specific actions they can take. But I'll share some of the behaviors. So for increasing, allowing employees to experience uniqueness, it means demonstrating support for diversity and inclusion that's vocal and visible. Having empathy, you mentioned empathy, so this is one of the 4 key characteristics of leaders who are inclusifiers, is that they actually take the time to listen to people and hear their perspective and understand their background. Having a learning orientation, which is a little bit different from empathy. So empathy might be like, I want to know how you feel, but also some of the reason I want to hear what your perspective is isn't just to be empathetic, but it's because I think I'm going to learn something from having that different perspective. And so really trying to increase the learning from other people shows people that they are unique and value their uniqueness. And then the last one is being fair. And so making sure that policies and procedures treat everyone, regardless of their unique identity, in a fair way. So those are the first 4.
I love it.
Thanks. And they spell out self is the idea. So support, empathy, learning, and fair. And then there's 4 behaviors for belonging too, that I think were actually more interesting as they came out. So the T is it spells team. T is being transparent. So letting employees know how decisions are made, why things are done the way they are, how pay is determined, how decisions will affect them. That allows employees to feel like they're on the inside, like they know what's going on. E in team is empowered. So allowing people to do work in their own way, the way they think they should do it, helps people feel like they belong, right? Like if someone's micromanaging you, you don't really feel like you're an essential element of the team, right? The A is aligning, and that really gets to this making sure that your inclusive leader behaviors are not excluding some groups. Even if that group is white men, you're not leaving them out in an effort to focus on including women or people of color or women of color.
Mhm.
Because I think a kind of interesting thing that came out from the research was that so many men feel left out by diversity and inclusion efforts, and they don't feel like they're valued in that effort. And if that becomes a big part of your organization or team, then you're leaving out a big group of people.
Mhm.
And the M in team is motivating diversity and inclusion through cultural practices, rites and rituals, making sure that you're actually celebrating the differences as a group. So you're bringing those differences together and making them part of the team.
How would you say that a leadership team would start to adapt this process if they, let's say, they only do a couple of these?
Right.
How would they integrate this into the way that they communicate and serve with their employees?
That's the best question, right? So I actually created an assessment so leaders can see if they might have a tendency toward one of these different archetypes, like the culture crusader or the meritocracy manager, kind of where is the greatest risk that they're going to misstep.
Mhm.
And people can take that at inclusifier.com and they can take the assessment and it'll give them feedback on which one they might be most at risk of and then give them suggestions for like what to start with. But
That's
if you didn't
awesome.
do that, oh, thanks. If you didn't do that, I think maybe the first place to start is by focusing on your team meetings, because that was something that came up over and over again. Oftentimes we're sitting at our desks, we're doing our work. It doesn't matter if you're included or not, right? You're just like getting your job done.
Sure.
But when you sit in a room with everyone and you feel like you can't speak up or no one's listening to you, you get talked over, that is the moment where people feel that exclusion. And so all of the leaders who were inclusifiers talked about what specifically they do in meetings to make sure that everyone's contributing. And so I'll tell you some of those things.
Yeah, I would love to know.
So one thing is letting people know the agenda and what you're going to cover in advance so they can have time to prepare. Not everyone's going to prepare, but not everyone is an extrovert. And sometimes when a leader says, okay, I need input on this, not everyone thinks immediately. Like people don't always think great on the fly, right? Some of us do, some of us don't. And so letting people have the time to prepare helps. Then when you get in the room, finding ways to make sure everyone contributes. And that might be different for every organization. You can have people each take turns sharing their ideas. If your group is too big for that, you can make sure that you are calling people and saying, hey, I'm going to call on you. I'm going to ask you your opinion on this in a couple minutes because I want to know what you think from your perspective before we move on. And
Well, that is so nice to have a heads up.
yeah, I know. I put the heads up in there too. The calling on people is a little Socratic, like tell me now what you think. But that does a couple things. It tells people, I actually want to know your opinion. I'm not calling on you because you're not talking enough and I'm punishing you. It's because I want to know your perspective. And it gives people the like 2 minutes to actually think it through.
Yeah.
And then like the other thing I love is amplification. And that is, did you ever hear about amplification from the Obama White House?
No.
Did you ever hear this term? So it was the women staffers on Obama's team started engaging in amplification, they called it. And it was essentially when women were spoken over or their ideas were co-opted, like I say something and then maybe the guy next to me says the same thing and everyone attributes the idea to that person.
Yeah.
And you've had this happen,
We've
right?
been there. Yep.
Yes. So I've had it happen too. And I know from experience when you say, actually, that was my idea, that no one reacts positively. They're like, we're a team. Who cares whose idea it was, right? So it's really hard to get your credit back.
Mhm.
However, other people at the table can be sure that's happening. And so they can say, I love that idea. And I loved it when Stephanie said it first. And the fact that both of you think this means it's probably a good idea. And so making sure that not only are people allowed to speak, but they're actually heard, even if no one's paying attention the first time around.
Yeah. And they're both celebrated. Like you both had a great idea. Stephanie, thank you for
Yeah.
that, having that
Yes.
first. People wouldn't understand why that's important though, unless like time and time again, you are not recognized for having the idea first.
Exactly. And so many women and women of color talked about that exact experience. And if they speak up and it's like, well, it doesn't matter, we're all a team. They're like, but it does matter, because who
Mm-hmm.
gets the promotion?
Mm-hmm.
The people
Yeah.
with the great ideas. And if
Yeah.
no one's giving me credit for my ideas, then I don't know, it feels bad. It feels like you're not being valued. Just like you said, I think that's what it comes down to, is knowing that you're valued.
So with this process, what would you say some of the common pitfalls or frustrations are that leaders might experience?
I think it doesn't happen overnight. I'll say, with the team meetings,
Mm-hmm.
leaders I talked to saw like immediate changes. They're like, wow, just changing that meeting has actually started to get people talking more, like the quiet people. They actually talk to me outside of the meetings now too, right?
That's
So
awesome.
for sure, I think that changes quickly. However, are you going to have 50% women and 50% people of color and 50%, like, are you going to actually have that diversity throughout your organization overnight? No, like
Yeah,
that
probably not.
takes time, and it takes follow up and continuing to grow and develop. And so I think that's the frustration.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen overnight. Just like anything we do,
Yeah.
that's worth doing, it takes work. And I think that's true, for this. One of the frustrations that a lot of leaders talked about before taking the quiz and before learning about white knights is, a lot of men talked about the frustration of wanting to help, but not really doing so successfully, and making other men in the organization upset or alienating them. So I think that is a pitfall that can
Yeah.
easily be fixed by recognizing the fact that
Mm-hmm.
inclusion means everyone, you know?
Yeah. And I can see too, like from meetings that I've been a part of, I've worked with so many people who are task oriented. They are not so much people oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So to allow more time for people to weigh in with their ideas and thoughts or feelings, that's more time. And for these task oriented leaders, anytime you add time to their plate, that's like currency. So I can see that that would be
Yeah,
a frustration also. I mean, a very valuable need that needs to be implemented, but I could see that that would also be a potential pitfall is the added time.
I think that's true. However, I would say, at least with the meetings, I use this like pretty clear example. If what you really wanted was a one-way communication of this is how we're going to do things, then don't have the meeting.
Yeah,
Just send an email,
that's a
right?
great
Or do a
point. Yeah, you're
memo.
right. Don't waste our
If
time.
exactly. So let's save tons of your time. And anytime you don't want our input, just send an email. And then when you do need input, let's actually create a meeting space where you get what you're looking for. And that is different perspectives and different points of view to make a better decision,
That's a
avoiding
fantastic point.
groupthink. Yeah. And they seem like, I mean, everyone likes that. Like, wait, I should have fewer meetings like that because those are lame. And when I do need input, I really do want people to give their perspective, even if it takes longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true that two minds are better than one, and having more people weigh in, I mean, that's certainly going to add value.
Yeah, they call this the wisdom of the crowd. And so
Hmm.
it's this mathematical algorithm. I think it's pretty neat. But essentially, like, if you're making decisions only with people who are similar to you, then all of you are likely to make the same mistakes. And you're likely to agree that the mistake is the correct course of action. But when you make decisions with a diverse crowd of people with different backgrounds and perspectives, you're still going to make errors. But because all of your errors are uncorrelated, the end result is that you will come to the correct actual decision.
Oh, I love that. I'm writing that down. Wisdom of the crowd.
There's a webpage. You
Okay,
can run
great.
the mathematical algorithm later.
What role do employees play in this process?
Oh man. So this inclusifying isn't just for people who hold positional leadership. This is leadership that everyone can exhibit, because
Mhm.
you can be the person who amplifies. You can start an amplification circle, where you plan to amplify people, or be a supporter, or try to be a mentor or sponsor, even if you're not in a leadership role. So anyone can engage in these behaviors to make the workplace better. And they're super contagious. So maybe it'll filter its way up. The other thing for employees I think is so important is a little bit of grace, because
Mm.
as leaders try these things, they're going to misstep, right? They're going to say things that just really don't come off right. when like someone says, "Oh, Stephanie, we want your opinion. You're a Mexican woman. What do Mexican people think?" Like, okay,
Oh
that's not the
gosh.
uniqueness I was going for. And I'm gonna like give you a little grace to know that you're trying to work on this, and you're a work in progress. So am I.
Sure.
Um, because I think that's one thing that really discourages leaders is like when they get shot down for they're trying to do something good, and then they're like, oh my God, I just messed this up and now I'm super embarrassed and everyone thinks I'm a racist now because I'm trying to be inclusive.
Yeah. Well, I see that in even interpersonal relationships or romantic relationships. Somebody is really trying to change the way that they speak and be more sensitive in whatever area. And then when we just shoot them down because they didn't do it right, like who's going to be the brave one to just try again the next day? It's very vulnerable.
Oh, it totally is. Well,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you something funny. I have even been using this concept of uniqueness and belonging outside of work. So with friends and like with my partner, and I think of my kids, like this comes up more with them than anyone else when they're having struggles, like with their friends or at school. It almost always is because of uniqueness or belonging. They're feeling like left out, they don't belong, or they're feeling like no one is. They want to be different from everyone, but then they want to be the same because they want to be accepted. And so I think this is like at the core of a lot of what people struggle with.
Yeah. Universally. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Well, I'd love to pull in the idea of innovation here, if you don't mind. One of our earlier episodes on Project HR was with Doug Buse on the topic of innovation. And it's a topic that's of great interest to our audience. And how do you say Inclusify specifically impacts innovation in a team or a work group?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we found is in more inclusive teams that are diverse and that people feel included, that one of the greatest things to change is actually innovation. I mean, I think that's why I put it in in the title, because that's what you're getting is different perspectives, and you're getting it because people are willing to share. And so the natural outcome is innovation. Like this one study looked at diversity programs and looked at companies over time, and how many diversity policies and practices. And like they were very diverse in how they measured diversity, like age, military, disability, LGBTQ. And what they found is companies that had more diversity actually, on average, created two more products per year.
Wow.
Isn't that's like, I mean, I don't know how many products companies actually create in a year, but
That's
two sounds like a
huge.
lot. I think
Yeah,
that's
it really
huge.
does.
Yeah. And those effects are only more pronounced when a team's also inclusive. So you
Gosh,
do the diversity plus the inclusion.
yeah, I can so see that. I can see that people would be way more willing to take risks if they knew that their employers saw them and celebrated them for their uniqueness. I mean, I know that I
Absolutely.
would. Yeah.
Yeah. And if your boss is trying to learn all the time, has that learning orientation, like that means oftentimes learning means trying something. It might fail, but pivoting to try to learn from your mistakes. So it's not just like you have to do everything perfectly, but we're going to learn. That's the important part.
Yeah. Well, and the humility too. If somebody is leading you with humility and trying to learn from everybody else, that's contagious and that's going to go from the top down, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How would you say engagement is impacted? If people feel seen, I'm guessing that well, we're kind of already talking about this, but that they would automatically feel more engaged. How do you think that that practically plays out? Have we already answered that? We've kind of
I
already
don't think
answered
so.
that. Okay, go
Eh,
for it.
So I think in terms of engagement, we find that people are more engaged in diverse workplaces. First of all, which I think is pretty neat, particularly among millennials and Gen Z. They expect that they grew up in a more diverse society, and they expect their workplace to reflect that,
Hmm.
and that helps engagement. And then everyone feels more engaged when they feel included, and so I think that's super important because engagement drives turnover. Like if you don't feel engaged, then you might quit your job or
Right.
search for other
Hmm.
opportunities. And feeling like, I can't leave because they need me, like that. I mean, I think that's huge to people, that people want to do a good job. They want to feel like what they're doing is important and the organization needs them, right? I mean, I think I feel that way. I think everyone does.
I do too. Yeah. Well, I just feel like this process would help leaders connect with their employees on a higher level in general. And I can see that that is part of what makes it work well.
Absolutely.
hmm Well, Stephanie, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and our guest today is Dr. Stephanie Johnson, author of Inclusify, The Power of Uniqueness and Belonging to Build Innovative Teams. And we are back. Stephanie, how long does it take for inclusification to become fully integrated into a team?
So I would say if you just started the improving your team meetings, you would see changes in 2 meetings. So if you meet once a week, I think you could do that in 2 weeks. You would start to see that people are more willing to speak up. They start to feel more connected. So I'm going to say 2 weeks. How long is it going to take you to change your whole organization? I'm going to say 2 years.
2
So
years.
it takes a lot longer, and that's with continued effort. It'll take a couple years to really get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that in addition to your efforts with Inclusify, you also speak on a wide range of HR-related topics for speaking engagements, workshops, and the like. How can somebody book you to speak at their event?
Oh, for sure. So I have a website, Dr. Steph Johnson, which is DRSTEF Johnson.com, and they can click the speaker button, and I'm super happy to chat with them. This is like my passion. I love doing it. I talk a lot about unconscious bias, and then now moving beyond unconscious bias. It's like you need to work on unconscious bias is stage 1, and then stage 2 might be inclusifying.
So if I were to ask you what are your favorite HR-related topics to speak on, would you say those would be it?
Yeah, I think unconscious bias, I think, is a great one. I really like to talk about staffing and how to increase diversity in your pipeline and in your decision-making processes, how to make them more fair. And I talk a lot about corporate boards. That's more to executive teams. But I think those are my kind of 3 favorite. I also love talking about women in STEM, and talking to women's groups and talking about why it's so important that we have women in science. And I think it really matters.
No, yeah, it's very important. Do you also offer workshops around Inclusify and that process that we've been talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do I can come talk about Inclusify. I've done Inclusify coaching if someone needs some more personal attention. There's a game that I've created to help make the empathy and learning and awareness a little easier for people.
So you will do these workshops with not only with the leaders in the room, but also with the employees. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's great for teams, and teams can do it on their own without me being there.
What a great tool. Well, just so you guys know who are listening, Stephanie's website and the various links that we have gone over will all be included in this episode's companion guide, along with a link to pre-order Inclusify. So be sure to sign up for that at projectionsinc.com/podcast, and we will send it right over. But before you do that, let's finish this interview because we are not done yet. Stephanie, it's time for our lightning round questions. These are questions that we ask every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Topic showdown. In your book, you present 2 powerful but conflicting human desires: to stand out and to fit in. 2 equally powerful, conflicting human desires, at least when it comes to snacks, are salty versus sweet. In your opinion, in this moment, which would you rather eat? A handful of pretzels or a chocolate chip cookie?
I'll go cookie.
Me too. What's the worst job interview question you have ever been asked?
Oh, man. It wasn't a question, but I went to an interview right when I finished my PhD. So I think I was really young. I was like 25 or 26.
Wow.
And the interviewer said, "Oh, we thought you'd be older."
What? Rude.
I was like, I know. I was like, I will be. I will.
It will one day.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. What's your favorite thing about working in business education?
Oh, the students, definitely. They're so inspiring. I think this generation, Gen Z, are just super cool and motivated, but also really aware of society, and they're super inclusive. They're easy to inclusify for sure.
That's awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think be yourself. And, I think that is maybe part of the idea of Inclusify. Like, I think I spent a lot of my life trying to fit in. And, people always say be yourself, right? Like, I can't even think of one person who said that, but I think it's really true. Like, you never really feel included unless you're accepted as yourself.
Sure. And how much greater would it be in our own selves if we celebrated our uniqueness and our belonging to ourselves?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And last question, who or what inspires you?
I think progress. I'm super inspired by, I think, the changes I've seen in corporations since 2016. I think the Me Too movement dramatically changed people's awareness of women's issues and equality. And I think we're starting to see change. Like, I saw this statistic that on corporate boards last year in 2019, new directors, like the first time they're added to the board, 46% were women.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, that
right?
is progress.
And 10 years ago, it was 17%.
What?
So, yeah, it's like almost 50%. I think I'm going for 50-50 in 2020. So corporate boards, I think you need to add a few more women.
That is inspiring. That's great. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Stephanie, on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I love talking to you. And as always, thanks to our listeners. And once again, don't forget to grab the companion for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. And as always, in it, you'll find notes, links, resources, and more. Also, if you'd like to be on Project HR or know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. Finally, we'd love for you to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. Your ratings help more people to find us online, so thanks for helping us get the word out. Well, that's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.